Hi everyone, here's another tool to add to your inventory. My name is Akshita and I'm an international med student studying at UNSW Sydney. And today we are going to expand a little bit on something I put out 2 weeks ago. A lot of you really liked my video on how my failure got me into medicine. I will link that up somewhere here. I mentioned in that video that there were some small things I had done to improve my performance over the 2 years that I felt like I absolutely did not know how to study. I thought that maybe it's worth expanding on those points and tell you what exactly I did and how they helped me get through the last 2 years of school. So let's get into it. So the very first thing that I started doing quite unconsciously was keeping an emotional dumping journal. This is different from your typical diary or journaling because I never made it a thing to make it of a regular frequency. I wasn't being consistent with the content in it. It was just this one book that I always had where I could put all my plans, my work to do for the day, my emotional state of mind, whether I'm happy, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling grateful, everything. If I felt a strong emotion, I would write it down right then and there. And there were two specific reasons for why I did that. Number one, it gives you an outlet to not bottle up your emotions, because that's in a fast-paced, high-pressure environment like your last few years in high school, where everything is geared towards, getting into your dream uni. You could miss out on actually dealing with the feelings that you have on events that happen on a daily basis. So having that emotional journal was really good in that I would pour out everything. But the second thing there was, I never really used to reread these entries that I used to put into that book. I would never go back and visit them. The point of that practice was that when there's something going on in my head and I would write that down, I'm kind of forcing my brain to analyze it comprehensively to be able to put it out into words. And you'll be surprised at how many things or new realizations or new conclusions you come out with as you are writing it down. It was a very intriguing feeling. As I'm writing the words down, new thoughts would come into my head and new realizations and eureka moments would happen, because I have suddenly, in an effort to put things together, to put it down in a sentence, I have realized something that I hadn't realized so far while that thought was just sitting in and swirling in my head. So it was a really great method to make sure that I get the idea really clear, I learn what I need to learn from that situation, or I just have better realization and a better understanding of whatever would have happened in that process. And that kept my emotional levels at good control, because I was being self-aware, I was being self-reflective, and it helped me manage the ups and downs of day-to-day times in high school. So the next habit that I really focused on was keeping music, social media, and movies out of reach just before the exam. So when you're planning the exam, maybe like 8 weeks or 6 weeks or maybe even a few months earlier, I would write out what I need to do over the weeks, but I would also put in the days where I will stop certain things that I do for fun. So it would go in stages. So at maybe an 8-week interval, I'm going to stop watching movies until the exam. At a 4-week interval, I'm going to stop social media on that before the exam. And then maybe like a 2-week period before the exam, I'm also going to stop music for that time. So by the end, towards the start of the exam, I am devoid of any distractions that I would have ever had during that study. Now, a lot of you may argue that that is detrimental because you're taking away things that help you take a break, but I have a solution for that, and stay tuned for the next tip on that one. But back to the point here. I found several benefits of doing this staged lockdown method. Oh my god, I've used that word lockdown, but anyway. That staged method of going into full focus. So one is very obvious. It's well proven that there's no such thing as multitasking. When you put music on while you're working, your brain is just very quickly switching between the two, and that just makes it tired earlier and it makes you lose focus earlier and all of that stuff. That was never something to disprove. So even though I do use music on a daily basis to study, when I'm focusing on for an exam, I choose to avoid that inefficiency, and I decided that I don't need those things. Now, another thing about watching TV and social media is that they are very highly stimulating, just these two particular activities. So, at least for me, I know that I felt this as an inherent pattern throughout, but I also realized the scientific basis behind it when I joined med. When you are learning and putting in new information in your head, there is a part of your midbrain that's sitting like deep inside. It's called the hippocampal formation, where information is stored short term. And then connections between that hippocampus and like your front brain, your back brain, the cerebellum, and all of those different parts start making connections to it to consolidate that short-term memory into long-term memory. And that actually takes time. It takes a while for that to happen. So if you've studied for like 2 or 3 hours and then you decide that you want a break and you go on social media for it, or you decide you want to take a break and you watch a movie, that level of stimulation will interrupt this consolidation process, and you're going to remember the memory with lots of mistakes. You're going to distort the memory recollection process, and it's just going to disrupt it. To me, and at that time in 11th and 12th, it was about how stimulating my break activity is. So by that sense, comparing it to my studies, social media, movies, music were just too highly stimulating for me to be able to use as a break. I needed something that makes me think I'm taking a break, but also not stimulating enough that I'm having too much fun with it and that it would interrupt me in my consolidation process so much. And so that takes me to my tip number 3. So the third habit that I had was having specific hobbies just for my exam periods. It sounds very funny, but at age of 18, when I was in 12th grade, I was watching Johnny Test the cartoon. I don't know how many of you would know it. I don't know how I discovered it on YouTube, but I would watch that cartoon every time I'm in my exam period. And then there was also the game Piano Tiles. Everybody knows that game. It's been on the phone for ages. But that game and the Johnny Test cartoon, those two were the things I used to watch when I was in the exam period. Now, as a 18-year-old cartoon, really? Come on. And it's the same exact episodes over and over and over again. There's a very small number of finite episodes. So it was a very boring thing to do, but it was just enough to make me feel like I was taking a break, but not stimulating enough to make it like how watching movies, watching TV shows, and social media was like. The next really crucial thing that I did for my marks was to start asking questions, no matter how stupid, how basic, how loophole your concepts may be. So there was a moment of 5 days in grade 11 where I had to go to New York for a conference. And in those 5 days, I missed the time where my teachers were teaching vectors in physics. So basic concept of vectors, additions, vector additions, vector multiplications, the dot and cross products. You physics students would know about it. But essentially, I had missed that basic concept. And so when I came back, even though I tried to cover it up, I did sit with the extra classes, I still just didn't catch it well. And so for the whole of grade 11 and 12, it was such a struggle to get through the questions, because just like how a student cannot do maths if they don't learn addition and subtraction well, I just couldn't do physics or couldn't do derivations because I hadn't consolidated that vectors concept well. Now I had to find a way to fix it. And so the only way I found to do it was ask questions, knowing fully well that you might be faced with a little bit of a strange reaction. So there were a lot of times where I was asking questions that seemed like could be quite basic, but I needed the answers because I had to figure out the loopholes that were in my study so I could catch up with the concepts that I need to know now. I remember there was one moment where I couldn't calculate the center of mass of a particular setting, and that's something we learn in grade 9 and grade 10, but I needed help with it, and I didn't care what somebody thought of me. I needed the answer. I needed to know how to solve it. You can show me how to do it. Now this last tip is more towards maths and physics specifically, but can be used everywhere. These subjects are more about practice and less about understanding. You know, we had in my CBSE curriculums this really scary reference books. Like for maths, we had something called an R.D. Sharma. I can't believe I'm using these words on the camera because they are such annoying books to have. For physics, we used to have H.C. Verma. It had like part 1 and 2. Absolutely torturous in the number of questions they had for us to solve. But those were some things that were really highly encouraged by all my teachers to use because they felt like practice, and I never really understood why that was needed. When you understand a concept or a derivation, you have usually learned it through a passive means. You have studied it in a textbook, you've watched a video on it, or you have seen a teacher explain it to you. All of those are passive methods of learning, which is simply not enough. As I said, your brain takes a little bit of time to consolidate, and all you are doing in this one method of passive learning is partially understand a derivation or a concept in one particular direction in the way you have learned it from this other person. But when you practice different questions that are framed differently, asking for different variables, complicating it by adding a real life scenario, you're trying to understand the exact same concept from different angles, which helps with that consolidation process. And the thing is, every time you solve a question or you attempt to solve a question and get it wrong, you've just been faced by a perspective or a concept that you need to know. And that ties back in with the previous one. If you don't push your boundaries and if you don't ask questions and practice more and more, you're never going to know what you don't know. And so that's the only way you get through any problem solving related concepts in high school. This is something I follow even today. The reason why neurologists or any particular specialist is really good at their job is because they've seen the same thing for 30, 40, 50 years. And that's why it is so obvious to them. They understand it through and through because they have seen hundreds and hundreds of patients present different types of presentations, but they've all come down to the same diagnosis. So that problem solving has had a lot of practice, and that's why specialists are really good at that particular disease or specialty. So practice is something that's going to stay with you for the long haul, so you might as well get used to doing that when you are in high school. So that's it. Those were the 5 main habit changes that I made that really helped me push up my marks from the last time I felt like a complete failure. I'll put that link up here, but definitely check that out. And if you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, make sure to like this video, share it around, and comment down below and tell me what habits you have changed, or if there's been anything different that you've tried that has helped you. As always, if you have found any value from this channel in general, subscribe to it, make this inventory your own. But until next Friday,